Hello. Let me ask you a question that might sound strange. Have you ever felt a sudden sharp pain in your back or side, a pain so intense it takes your breath away and sends waves of nausea through your body? A pain that has been compared to childbirth or passing a shard of glass. If you're over 60, your chances of experiencing this exact scenario, a kidney stone, have likely doubled compared to your younger years. It's one of the most excruciating events a person can endure, and I've seen it bring even the strongest of my patients to their knees. What's truly alarming is that in many cases, the very foods we turn to for our health, the superfoods we are told to eat, can be the primary culprits. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on this painful condition. We're not just going to talk about it, we're going to arm you with the knowledge to potentially prevent it from ever happening to you. The first food we need to discuss is one that many of my patients are shocked to learn about: spinach. Yes, that leafy green powerhouse packed with iron, vitamin A, and antioxidants. I had a patient, let's call her Eleanor, who came to see me a few months after her 65th birthday. She was vibrant, active, and had recently decided to get serious about her health by starting every single day with a green smoothie. She was blending up a huge handful of raw spinach with some fruit and almond milk, feeling proud of her choices. But then she ended up in the emergency room, doubled over in agony. The diagnosis? A calcium oxalate kidney stone. Eleanor was devastated. "But doctor," she said to me, "I was doing everything right. Spinach is supposed to be good for me." This is a story I hear far too often. Here is the simple scientific truth behind it. Your body is a remarkable chemical factory. When you eat certain foods, they are broken down into various compounds. Spinach, along with many other plants, is incredibly high in a compound called oxalate. Now, oxalate on its own isn't necessarily a villain. But here's the problem. In your urinary tract, this oxalate can bind with calcium. Imagine tiny, microscopic magnets. The oxalate and the calcium find each other and lock together, forming a hard, insoluble crystal. When thousands of these tiny crystals clump together, they form a stone. Think of it like thousands of tiny, sharp grains of sand forming a jagged rock inside the delicate plumbing of your kidneys. The pain comes when your body tries to pass this rock through the very narrow tube called the ureter. Eleanor's daily megadose of raw spinach in her smoothie was flooding her system with oxalates, creating the perfect storm for a stone to form. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about your own diet. Have you recently increased your intake of leafy greens, perhaps in salads or smoothies, thinking you were making a healthy choice? Do you find yourself adding a handful of spinach to your eggs or soups? There's nothing wrong with wanting to be healthy, but it's about being smart, not just enthusiastic. The practical takeaway here isn't to banish spinach forever. It's about moderation. Instead of a huge handful of raw spinach every day, consider steaming or boiling it. The cooking process can actually reduce the oxalate content by a significant amount. And perhaps limit your intake to a couple of times a week, in a reasonable portion size, about the size of your fist when cooked, instead of making it the foundation of a daily meal. It's about understanding the hidden risks in even the healthiest of foods. Let's move on to the second culprit, which is often a go-to snack for those of us trying to eat better for our heart health: almonds, and, by extension, many other nuts and seeds. This one is particularly tricky because for years, we doctors have been telling our patients to swap out potato chips and cookies for a handful of nuts. It's fantastic advice for your cholesterol, but it can be a trap for your kidneys if you're not careful. I remember a gentleman named David, a retired engineer in his late 60s. His cardiologist had praised him for lowering his LDL cholesterol by making simple dietary changes. His secret? Every afternoon, at precisely 3 p.m., he would eat a large mug full of almonds instead of the biscuits he used to enjoy. He was proud, and rightfully so. But then he started experiencing a persistent, dull ache in his lower back. He dismissed it as a sign of getting older, until the day the ache turned into a searing, incapacitating pain. David had a very large kidney stone that required a procedure to break it up. When we reviewed his diet, the culprit became clear. That daily, generous portion of almonds was delivering a massive load of oxalates to his system, day after day. The science is exactly the same as with spinach. Almonds, cashews, and peanuts are some of the highest oxalate-containing nuts. The oxalates they contain readily bind with calcium in the urine, forming those painful calcium oxalate crystals. It's like adding too much salt to a glass of water eventually. It can no longer dissolve and solid crystals start to form at the bottom. Your kidneys are that glass of water. When you consistently overload them with oxalates from sources like nuts, you're essentially encouraging these crystals to precipitate out of your urine and build up into stones. The tragedy for David was that he thought he was making an unequivocally healthy choice, but the dose makes the poison. He wasn't just having a snack, he was consuming a concentrated dose of the very compound that his body was susceptible to. So let's make this practical. I want you to ask yourself, are nuts my default snack? Do I keep a large container of almonds or mixed nuts on my desk or in my car and eat them without really measuring? It's so easy to do. A recommended serving size of almonds is about 1 ounce, which is roughly 23 almonds. That's about a small, cupped handful. For many people, especially those who have never had a kidney stone, this amount is perfectly fine. But for someone like David, who is a stone former, even this amount daily might be too much. If you have a history of kidney stones, or a family history of them, you need to be especially cautious. A real-world example of a better approach would be to diversify your snacks. Instead of almonds every day, perhaps on Monday you have an apple. On Tuesday, you have a small portion of low-sodium cheese. On Wednesday, you can have that small measured portion of almonds. By rotating your snacks, you prevent the constant, high-level exposure to oxalates from a single source. It's not about deprivation, it's about strategic variety. You can still get the heart-healthy benefits of nuts without waging war on your kidneys. Next on our list is an item that is a cherished ritual for millions of people. A comforting cup of tea. For many, it's how they start their day or wind down in the evening. It's a ritual steeped in tradition and perceived health benefits. The idea that this simple pleasure could be contributing to such an agonizing condition is often met with disbelief. Let me tell you about a patient of mine, a lovely woman named Sarah, who was 72. She had been drinking 3 to 4 cups of strong black tea every single day since she was a young woman. It was her non-negotiable comfort. Over the past few years, she'd had 2 episodes of kidney stones, both requiring medical intervention. She was frustrated and scared, feeling as though her body was betraying her. She ate a balanced diet, she was active, and she couldn't understand what she was doing wrong. We went through her entire daily intake, and the one constant high-volume item was the black tea. She was heartbroken at the thought of giving it up. "Dr. Clark," she said, "that tea is my comfort. It's what gets me through the day." Her story highlights a critical point. It's the cumulative effect over time that can cause the problem. Black tea, particularly when brewed strong, is very high in oxalates. Just like with spinach and almonds, consuming it day in and day out creates a persistently high concentration of oxalates in your urine. Imagine a slow, steady drip of water carving a channel in a rock over decades. In a similar way, a daily habit of drinking high oxalate tea can, for a susceptible individual, create the ideal environment for crystals to form and grow over many years. It is not the single cup of tea that is the problem. It is the relentless daily exposure that tips the scales. The simplified science here involves not just the presence of oxalates, but their concentration. Your kidneys work to filter waste from your blood and excrete it in urine. For stones to form, the urine needs to become supersaturated with crystal-forming substances like calcium and oxalate. This means there are more of these substances than the liquid can hold in solution. Drinking several cups of strong black tea every day is like constantly pouring more and more of these crystal-forming compounds into your system, making supersaturation, and therefore stone formation, much more likely. So, here are my reflective questions for you today. Is a strong cup of tea your go-to beverage throughout the day? Do you find yourself refilling your mug with black tea without a second thought? It's time to assess that habit with a new perspective. The good news is, you don't necessarily have to give up your comforting ritual entirely. A practical strategy is to make some smart swaps. For instance, you could reduce your intake to 1 cup of black tea a day and switch to green tea or herbal teas like peppermint or chamomile for your other cups, as these are generally much lower in oxalates. Another fantastic tip, especially for black tea drinkers, is to add milk. The calcium in the milk can bind with the oxalates in your stomach and intestines before they even get to your kidneys. This allows them to be excreted in your stool rather than your urine, effectively disarming them. Sarah was able to adopt this strategy. She didn't give up her beloved morning tea, but she switched to herbal teas in the afternoon and always added a good splash of milk to her morning brew. She hasn't had a stone since. All right, let's move from the beverage world back to the dinner plate and talk about an incredibly common staple food, the potato. Specifically, white and sweet potatoes. They are filling, affordable, and a foundation of countless meals, from a baked potato with dinner to French fries on the side. Because they are a vegetable, most people view them as a completely harmless, even healthy, part of their diet. But for those prone to kidney stones, the humble potato can be a hidden source of trouble. I had a patient, a gentleman named Frank, 70 years old, who was a meat and potatoes kind of guy. He had successfully managed his type 2 diabetes by cutting down on processed sugars and white bread, but he kept potatoes as a core part of his diet, believing them to be a wholesome, natural carbohydrate. He was particularly fond of baked sweet potatoes, having heard they were a superfood packed with vitamins. He was eating a potato in some form, baked, roasted, or mashed, almost every day. When he came to my office with the telltale signs of a kidney stone, he was completely baffled. I gave up soda, I gave up cake. He told me, I thought potatoes were safe. Frank's situation is a perfect example of how a good food can have a bad effect depending on your personal biochemistry. Both sweet potatoes and white potatoes are high in oxalates. A single medium-sized baked potato can contain a significant portion of the recommended daily limit of oxalates for someone who is a known stone former. When Frank was eating one every day, he was creating a constant supply of the raw materials his body needed to build another painful stone. He had done a wonderful job managing his blood sugar, but in the process had inadvertently overloaded his system with a different problematic compound. The physiological process remains the same, but let's use a different analogy. Think of your kidney as a filter in a machine. If you pour clean water through it, it works perfectly. But if you constantly pour water filled with fine sand and a sticky mineral, the filter is going to get clogged. The sand and minerals will clump together and form blockages. Eating high oxalate foods like potatoes every day is like consistently pouring that sandy, mineral-rich water into your system. Sooner or later, for a person whose system is sensitive, that filter is going to have a problem. The key is to reduce the amount of sand you're pouring in on a daily basis. I want you to pause and think about your own meals over the last week. How often have potatoes appeared on your plate? As baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, fries, or even in soups and stews. Are they your automatic side dish for most dinners? The practical solution here is not elimination, but smart substitution and preparation. For example, if you love a starchy side with your meal, you could swap out the potato for lower oxalate alternatives like white rice, cauliflower mash, or pasta a few times a week. This immediately reduces your weekly oxalate load. Furthermore, how you prepare potatoes matters. Boiling potatoes and discarding the water can significantly reduce their oxalate content, as a portion of the oxalates will leach out into the water. This is a much better option for a stone former than baking or roasting, which keeps all the oxalates intact. Frank learned to love cauliflower mash, and when he did have potatoes, he made sure they were boiled. This simple change made all the difference. Now we need to address a category of foods that has become increasingly popular, especially among those looking for dairy alternatives or plant-based protein sources: soy products. Foods like tofu, edamame, soy milk, and soy-based protein powders are often marketed as cornerstones of a healthy, modern diet. While they do offer benefits for many, for an individual prone to kidney stones, they can be a significant and often overlooked source of oxalates. This brings to mind a patient of mine, Maria, who was 68. She was concerned about bone density after menopause and had read that switching from dairy milk to fortified soy milk could be beneficial. So she made the switch. She poured soy milk over her cereal in the morning, used it in her coffee, and often had a block of tofu for dinner as her main source of protein. Within a year, she experienced her first kidney stone. She was doing everything she could to protect her bones, and in the process, she had unknowingly created a perfect storm in her kidneys. Her case was particularly frustrating for her because she felt she was following expert health advice, yet she ended up in terrible pain. The scientific reason is straightforward. Soybeans are naturally very high in oxalates. When you consume concentrated forms of soy, like soy milk or tofu, you are getting a very concentrated dose of these compounds. Maria's new diet meant that from morning until night, she was introducing a steady stream of oxalates into her body. Her system simply couldn't process and flush them out quickly enough before they began to bind with calcium in her urine. Think of it like a rain gutter on a house. In a light shower, the water flows through easily. But in a torrential downpour, the gutter gets overwhelmed, backs up, and overflows. By consuming high oxalate soy products at every meal, Maria was creating a constant downpour of oxalates in her kidneys, overwhelming their ability to keep things flowing smoothly. This is a good moment for you to reflect on your own diet, especially if you've made changes for health reasons recently. Have you started drinking soy milk or using soy-based creamers? Are you eating more plant-based meals featuring tofu or edamame? Look at the ingredient labels of protein bars or meal replacement shakes you might be using. Many contain soy protein isolate, another concentrated source of oxalates. It's often hidden in plain sight. The practical advice here is to be a mindful consumer. If you enjoy soy, you don't have to eliminate it entirely, but you cannot make it the foundation of your diet if you are at risk for stones. For instance, instead of soy milk, you could try almond milk. But be aware that almonds are also high in oxalates, so variety is key. Perhaps a better choice would be rice milk or coconut milk, which are lower. If you eat tofu, limit it to once a week and ensure that on that day you are not also eating other high oxalate foods like spinach or almonds. And most importantly, on days you do eat higher oxalate foods, you must be extra vigilant about your water intake to help dilute your urine and flush the system. For Maria, the solution was to go back to dairy milk for her bone health, which also provided the calcium to bind with oxalates in her gut, and to treat tofu as an occasional food rather than a daily staple. Let's turn to our sixth and final food on the avoidance list. And it's a vibrant one that has surged in popularity due to its reputation for lowering blood pressure and boosting athletic performance: beets and beet juice. This deep red root vegetable is perhaps the most potent oxalate powerhouse of them all. While its health benefits are real, for the wrong person, consuming beets, especially in a concentrated form like juice, can be like pouring gasoline on a fire. I want to tell you about George. George was a 73-year-old man with slightly elevated blood pressure, and he was determined to manage it without medication. He read several articles about the miraculous effects of beet juice. So, he bought a juicer and started his days with a large glass of fresh beet juice mixed with a bit of apple and carrot. He felt energetic, and he was thrilled when his blood pressure readings started to come down. He was a model patient, taking charge of his health. You can imagine his shock and utter dismay when he was rushed to the hospital with a kidney stone so large it was causing a blockage. The urologist was unequivocal. The massive daily influx of oxalates from the beet juice was the direct cause. George's well-intentioned health trend had led him to one of the most painful experiences of his life. This is a classic example of how health trends can be dangerous if not viewed through the lens of your individual medical history. Beets contain one of the highest concentrations of oxalates of any food. When you juice a beet, you remove the fiber and are left with a highly concentrated liquid of sugar and, you guessed it, oxalates. Drinking a glass of beet juice is like eating several whole beets at once, delivering an overwhelming payload of oxalates directly into your bloodstream and subsequently to your kidneys. It's the physiological equivalent of a flash flood. The delicate filtering system of the kidneys is simply not designed to handle that level of oxalate concentration all at once, making crystal formation almost inevitable in a susceptible person. So, who should never consume beets? If you have a personal history of calcium oxalate kidney stones, I would strongly advise you to avoid beets and beet juice entirely. The risk simply outweighs the benefits. For everyone else, extreme moderation is the only safe approach. A few slices of cooked or pickled beet on a salad once in a while is unlikely to cause a problem. But juicing them or eating them daily is a gamble. I urge you to think about this critically. Have you been swept up in the juicing or smoothie trend? Do you ever buy pre-made health juices or smoothies? Take a closer look at the ingredients list. Beetroot is a common ingredient used for color and sweetness, and it might be in there without you even realizing it. You might think you're just having a berry smoothie, but if beet is on the label, you are getting an extra dose of oxalates. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about being an informed and vigilant guardian of your own health. The powerful lesson from George's story is that natural and healthy are not always synonymous with safe for you. We have now spent a significant amount of time discussing the foods you should limit or avoid. But I must be absolutely clear on this next point, as it is arguably more important than everything we have discussed so far. You can have the most perfect low-oxalate diet in the world, but if you are not properly hydrated, you will still be at a very high risk of forming kidney stones. The single greatest weapon you have in preventing stones is not food avoidance, but adequate water intake. Hydration is the great protector of the kidneys. Let me share the story of a patient I'll call Susan. She was 66 and a diligent stone former. She had a list of high oxalate foods taped to her refrigerator. She avoided spinach, nuts, beets. She did everything right according to the food lists. Yet she kept forming small, painful stones every year or two. She was at her wit's end when she came to see me. When I asked her how much water she drank, she said, "Oh, I drink when I'm thirsty." As we dug deeper, we realized she was probably only consuming about 3 to 4 glasses of fluid a day. She simply didn't have a strong sense of thirst, a common issue as we age. She was eating the right things, but her urine was constantly concentrated, creating a sludge-like environment where any small amount of oxalate and calcium could easily crystallize. Here is the science, and it's beautifully simple. Think of your urine as a river. The oxalates and calcium are like silt and pebbles in that river. If the river is full and flowing briskly, it easily carries all the silt and pebbles along and washes them out to sea. They never have a chance to settle and clump together. But if there's a drought and the river becomes a slow, shallow, sluggish creek, the silt and pebbles will inevitably settle at the bottom and form clumps and mounds. Dehydration does exactly that to your kidneys. It creates a low-volume, highly concentrated urine, the perfect breeding ground for stones. Water intake keeps the river flowing. It dilutes the concentration of oxalates and calcium, making it physically harder for them to find each other and form crystals. So, how much water do seniors actually need? A general rule of thumb is to aim for producing about 2 to 2.5 liters of urine per day. To achieve this, most people need to drink between 2.5 and 3 liters of fluid. That's about 80 to 100 ounces, or 10 to 12 8-ounce glasses. For some, that sounds like a daunting amount. A simple calculation method I give my patients is to take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's the number of ounces of fluid you should aim for daily. For example, a 160-pound person should aim for around 80 ounces. Now, a crucial question for you. Do you know, with certainty, how much fluid you drink each day? Or are you, like Susan, just drinking when you feel thirsty? The sensation of thirst diminishes as we age, making it an unreliable indicator of our hydration needs. A practical tip is to get a large water bottle, one that's at least 32 ounces, and make it your goal to fill and drink it 3 times throughout the day. Once by noon, once by 4 p.m., and once by 8 p.m. And look for the signs of adequate hydration. Your urine should be a pale, straw-like yellow. If it's dark yellow or amber, that's a clear sign your body's river is running too low. You must also consider medications. Many common drugs for blood pressure, like diuretics, actively work to remove fluid from your body, making your hydration needs even greater. It's a conversation you must have with your doctor. Susan bought a 32-ounce water bottle that very day, and by focusing on hydration above all else, she has finally broken her cycle of stone formation. We've journeyed through the dietary minefield of high oxalate foods and stressed the absolute necessity of hydration. Now, I want to bring it all together into a positive, proactive prevention plan. It's not enough to know what to avoid, you need to know what to embrace. This is about empowering you with safe, delicious alternatives and a simple daily protocol to protect your kidneys for the long term. This is where hope and action come together. Let's start with safe snack alternatives. So many of the problem foods we discussed are common snacks. What can you reach for instead? The good news is there are plenty of wonderful options. Low oxalate fruits are your friends. Think of crisp apples, sweet grapes, and hydrating watermelon. Slices of cucumber, which are full of water, are another excellent choice, perhaps paired with a low oxalate dip like hummus in moderation. If you crave something savory and crunchy, try air-popped popcorn with just a light touch of salt, or low-sodium whole-grain crackers with a slice of cheese. Notice I mention cheese. This brings up a critical point in our prevention protocol. Many people think they need to avoid calcium, but the opposite is true. You need adequate calcium in your diet. This brings me to my final patient story, a man named Robert who truly mastered the art of prevention. Robert had suffered from multiple kidney stones and was terrified of another one. Together, we created his kidney-safe action plan. The first rule was hydration tracking. He used the water bottle method we discussed, ensuring he consistently met his fluid goals. The second and most brilliant rule was about calcium timing. The science is simple but profound. If you consume a calcium-rich food along with a meal that might contain some oxalates, the calcium and oxalate will bind together in your stomach and intestines, not in your kidneys. They form a compound that is then simply excreted in your stool, never even getting a chance to enter your urinary tract. Robert started making sure he had a source of calcium, like a glass of milk, a cup of yogurt, or a piece of cheese, with his main meals. This simple act served as a defense mechanism, neutralizing oxalates before they could ever become a threat. So here is your prevention protocol, your daily checklist for kidney health. First, track your hydration relentlessly. Use a marked water bottle and make it a non-negotiable part of your day. Second, time your calcium with your meals. Aim for about 1,000 to 2,200 mg of dietary calcium per day, spread out among your meals, to help block oxalate absorption. Third, diversify your diet. Don't eat the same handful of healthy foods every single day. Rotate your fruits, vegetables, and snacks to avoid overloading on any single compound. And finally, know when to seek help immediately. If you experience that sudden, severe back or side pain, fever, chills, or nausea, do not wait. See a doctor or go to an urgent care center right away. I want to leave you with a sense of control and optimism. While the risk of kidney stones increases with age, they are not an inevitable part of getting older. By understanding the role of oxalates, prioritizing hydration above all else and making smart, strategic dietary choices, you can dramatically reduce your risk. You have the power to protect yourself. It begins with awareness, and it is sustained by consistent, mindful daily actions. Your health is your greatest asset. Guard it with wisdom.